let's do the Astounding Science Fiction book tag. This was, I think, originated by Michael K. Vaughan. I will link his video. And I was tagged by my friend Jeff from Not Just Book Reviews, who has a good channel dealing with genre fiction particularly, but also films and TV series, particularly genre TV and film series like James Bond, Deep Space Nine. Those are things he's discussed in recent months. This is quite a short one, so hopefully we'll get through it in a snappy fashion. Though the first question, I'm already going to ruin this. What was the first science fiction book that you read? What did you think of it? So, I don't know, is the answer. How is anyone meant to remember the first book they read of a particular genre, a fairly common genre? I think I'm going to give three answers here. One, possibly the answer is, and I don't know, Only You Can Save Mankind by Terry Pratchett, which is a very light sort of science fiction, which is the only Johnny book I've actually read of the Johnny trilogy, and I should read the others, but the only one I've read, I think, I got it from the library. I don't own it. And I enjoyed it. It basically involves Johnny going into a computer game or something. Some early 90s computer game, more or less Space Invaders with a twist. And he has to help some aliens in it, but because the game is called Only You Can Save Mankind and you have to eliminate the aliens, but it turns out there's some way in which the aliens inside it are real aliens in space who need help. We'll come back to that idea actually later in this list. An early science fiction book or books that I certainly read will have been The Time Machine and the Invisible Man by H.G. Wells. This is a nice Heinemann Octopus collection, complete and unabridged. I've got a couple of others. I'm trying to think. I've definitely got Asimov, and I think I have Wyndham as well with the same, and D.H. Lawrence of all people in the same editions. Really nice big hardbacks. I bought it for £1. Cripes. But yeah, and the Island of Dr Moreau as well I read in this edition. I don't know if I ever finished The War of the Worlds at the time, but when I was at least a relatively young teen, I read those books, and I liked them all. My friend Abby Naked History recently did a review or discussion of The Invisible Man and The Time Machine, and I'd recommend listening to her on those. But I think there's obviously just a plethora of invention in Wells that's really fun, and some just really effective, touching moments. Particularly, Time Machine and War of the Worlds both have some really effective, touching moments. The first sci-fi book on my reading record, which I started in 2007, is The Road by Cormac McCarthy, which won the Pulitzer Prize for Fiction in 2007. And this is just brilliant. As in, it's nominally a sci-fi in the sense that it's a post-apocalypse based on probably something chemical rather than something atomic. I don't know, but essentially there's no food is the big problem, and this father and son push their cart of scavenged food, running basically from cannibals, and looking for hope in a desolate America. And in terms of McCarthy's reputation as, this is unfair on him, but as a nihilistic writer, it's striking that this is, in a nihilistic setting, an anti-nihilistic book. It's a profoundly humanistic book. Yeah, the characters are great. The style is different. There's a whole thing. I mean, a big thing is that speech is never demarcated. It's part of essentially almost stream of consciousness description from McCarthy's point of view. But yeah, it's a brilliant book. One of the best books I've ever read. I'd highly recommend it. What's next? If you love science fiction... Oh, what was the last science fiction book you read? What did you think of it? I finished The Moonpool recently. I have a review of this. And Dwellers in the Mirage by A. Merritt Up. There's an annoying ting in the background. I'm not sure what went wrong with the mic there. But The Moonpool was okay. Dwellers in the Mirage was better. They're both solid. I enjoyed them both. But Dwellers in the Mirage was very good. The Moonpool was his first novel, and is about it's a very early Portal fantasy, or rather Portal sci-fi in that, and not probably the first. I mean, and by this I mean literally a portal. You go through a door, not you wait like John Carter. You wake up from a dream. But certainly it's inventive and creative and has wonderful vision. But it is perhaps a bit wooden and inartful in its character kind of development and stakes. If you love sci-fi, what made you love sci-fi? Well, I do. I realised one reason that I had to think about some of these answers a bit more than I might have for fantasy is that though I read a lot of genre fiction, my genre fiction is heavily skewed to fantasy. Though in the last couple of years, sci-fi has actually been the dominant genre, but historically fantasy has been the dominant genre. And I think that's because I like in the positive Tolkienian sense, the escapism of fantasy. And sci-fi sometimes provides that, but doesn't always. And a lot of very interesting sci-fi books are of only average literary merit, so you're engaging with them at one level, but not the other. Not all by any means. I'm just talking about kind of the cliche average. So I think what I like about sci-fi is I like the invention as a function of extrapolation. What things might we imagine could exist in our world given a particular technological twist? So something like Neuromancer with AI, or Ender's Game with deep space tech and kind of etc. Or what's another interesting example that you could use for that, Ringworld, which is not a great novel. It's a solid novel, better than some people have said recently, but solid. Or Gateway by Frederick Pohl. Actually, maybe that's a better example. Wormholes for or travel for Gateway, or Ringworld's the idea of artificial habitats, enormous artificial habitats in space for Ringworld. And I think that's fascinating and exciting. And at its best, it doesn't just present an idea of like, oh, what would happen if this happened? But it brings in real human stakes and says, actually, this will happen to people. Some of these things will basically happen to people in the hard sci-fi end, at least. And how will people, humans like us, react? And I think I like that combination in sci-fi. Question 4, what's your favourite sci-fi movie? This is a little hard because though I've watched plenty of sci-fi movies, I don't know that it dominates my mind or that I remember exactly how I'd rank stuff. I like lots. At one point I watched a lot of films, like I watched Moon and Sunshine and a few other big sci-fi films of the late noughties around the same time, and I really enjoyed them all. So I'd probably say, things like that. If space opera counts, Star Wars or Empire pretty certainly would be my favourites. Serenity, which is just behind me, is a very good space opera too. So it's hard to, and I'd say Serenity is a lot closer to sci-fi than Star Wars is on the space opera range. So yeah, I really like sci-fi films. I'm not, my cinematic classic genre list is not filled with sci-fi comparatively, so I don't know, but there's some options. 5, what is your favourite sci-fi TV show? On the other hand, this is one that I can talk about a lot more. I don't know what my favourite is, but it's going to be amongst Doctor Who, Star Trek Deep Space Nine, Babylon 5. And if you count superheroes into the sci-fi genre, which superheroes fundamentally, it's a genre fusion of various things, and it is its own genre, but its deepest roots are in sci-fi, and it brings in weird bits of fantasy. But then actually through the Silver Age, from the 50s onwards, it phases out the fantasy for a long time. Look at the kind of big Marvel renaissance of the 60s. It's all sci-fi. And the reason I mention that is because the DC Animated Universe is some of my favourite TV. So there's lots of sci-fi TV I like, and I wonder if it's because the episodic and character-led nature of sci-fi TV. By that I mean that necessarily you're engaging with the cast of characters you come to like. The reboot of Battlestar Galactica, another really good sci-fi series, but combined with the episodic format of here's an idea, or here's an idea, here's a character conflict. And those, I think I like that in a way that often serious, clever sci-fi films will leave me personally feeling more distant. 6, what sci-fi book do you feel should be read more often? So this one I'm going to go for, I've done it this way round, I'm going to go for The Book of the New Sun Volume 1, which was my top book of 2021. This might be in the top couple of sci-fi books I've ever read. It probably is. But without kind of going that far, what I'd say is that if you want a profoundly entertaining and weird and inventive, but also philosophic reflection on the self and on identity and on sanity, madness, what it means to be human, what makes us function well, this is just a great book, and I thought it was amazing. It's a Dying Earth book about a torturer's apprentice who ends up exiled, and getting into increasingly confusing events where it's not entirely clear what's really happening. So that's a book that should be read more widely, and the reason it's not compared to other great sci-fi books like something like Dune is that it is less accessible. It is. That was my phone. Advertising Audible. Jeff Bezos just will not leave us alone. But yeah, I think it's just a great book for that, but it's less accessible and therefore people maybe read it less. Favourite sci-fi short story? I don't read loads of short stories. I do read some and I enjoy them, but I haven't read many overall. You know, if I think I've probably read a dozen short story collections ever. But for sci-fi, though some of this is liminal and at the edges, almost certainly what I'd say is, because I can think, I've read some Asimov short stories, I've read some miscellaneous Hugo-winning short stories, including by Frederick Pohl, I think, and some others, and novellas. But probably The Illustrated Man, or some stories in The Illustrated Man by Ray Bradbury. The Last Night of the World, The Long Rain. Is the tiger one in this, or is it in a different book of his? Those are stories I've really enjoyed. When I last read those, or heard them read to me, probably a mixture of the two, 18 to 20 years ago, 20 years ago or something. So I've got that. That's a edition I bought fairly recently that I really want to read, and along with some other Bradbury books, I'm going to read at least The Martian Chronicles this year, which is short stories, so maybe that will be added to the list. But yeah, that's my favourite short story for the sake of argument. And then my favourite novel is not Ender's Game, though this is very good, and it's not Speak of the Dead, which is very good but I don't own, but this is something where basically I think the first three books of the Ender quadrilogy are equally good. I think Ender's Game and Speak of the Dead are very different, and that's why they're so well loved in different ways. Xenocide, the third book, is very similar to Speak of the Dead stylistically, and so I think it gets eclipsed. But Xenocide is probably the better novel. And so in terms of favourite sci-fi novel, I don't know, I could say, oh, well, I really did love Book of the New Sun last year, or Neuromancer, in fact, equally was very, very high. There have been points, Michael Marshall Smith novels, where if it's just for sheer enjoyment, I'm not sure I'd say they're the best ever, but for sheer enjoyment would be up there. But I think there are things that happen in Xenocide, which, based on both my investment in the Ender books and just kind of for sheer panache in how they're pulled off, both the reveals about the world and the reveals about characters, particularly, and this is for this is for those who have read it, a particular speech for the dead that Ender gives, which subverts expectation. I think it's probably the best of the four original Ender novels. I mean, number 4, Children of the Mind, is just okay, so it's really of the first 3 that matter. Hey, if you've read the Ender books, tell me what you think. Also, sell me on the Shadow books and the other Ender books, because I just have never got to them. Anyway, that is me. I'm going to tag, and they can do it if they like, and they don't have to do it if they don't want to, Andrew of Andrew's Wizardly Reads, and Mari from Book Reading, Coffee Drinking, both which are channels that I follow and enjoy. And they're both full of manic energy. They're kind of maybe the opposite to my incredibly boring presentation style. So if you really hate my channel, you like theirs. But actually, I think, a big thing is they cover lots of books that I don't. And they cover, I guess they talk about a lot more modern fiction in a way that I don't. So I think if you want a compliment to what I do, they are a perfect compliment. Anyway, and hey, feel free to do it yourself if you want. Anyway, that is it from me. Till next time.